Welcome to Handmade History.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sonia.
And today we are sharing the history of batik fabric. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Folkwear Patterns. Ever wondered how to recreate the elegance of a 1930s evening gown? Or the practical beauty of a French work shirt? Folkwear Patterns bring authentic, historic, and traditional clothing designs from around the world directly to your sewing table. For over 45 years, Folkwear has meticulously researched and recreated sewing patterns for garments from different cultures and time periods, from Victorian walking skirts to Japanese hoppy coats. Each pattern includes detailed historical context and authentic construction techniques that honor the original garments. Whether you're a costume designer, history enthusiast, art-to-wear seamstress, or simply appreciate timeless style, Folkwear helps you create clothing with a story. Experience the world's textile heritage through your own hands. Visit www.folkwear.com today and sew something extraordinary.
Thank you, Folkwear.
And now, onto the show. Sonia, I have a lot of batik fabric.
Really?
Would you like to hear my batik fabric story?
Yeah, I didn't know you had so much.
So about 16 years ago, I took a big trip and I backpacked around Southeast Asia. And I went to Indonesia, which we're going to talk a lot about today, and Malaysia. And I even went to Yogyakarta, which is one of the cities that we're going to talk about today. But I made friends with a woman who is from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and she took me shopping. And we went to a market that had a stall with a ton of really beautiful batik fabric. And my friend spoke with the seller, and then she came back to me and she said, I can get you batik for like $3 each. And I was really excited because these were like really beautiful. I still have many of them. They're really beautiful batiks. Like you cannot get them in the US. I've never seen anything quite like them. And they're really detailed. They have all these different colors on them. Anyway, so I was like, yes, sounds great. And she was like, the only thing is you have to buy 20 of them. And I remember like both her and the seller looking at me like, is she really going to do it? And I was like, no problem. No problem. I will buy 20 batiks. And I had to actually, because I was literally backpacking, I had to actually buy like a suitcase to carry my batiks around. So
Wow.
I had a backpack and then just like a small suitcase full of batik fabric.
Wow.
That's my batik story.
That's great. I never heard that one. I remember that trip, so.
Sure, I gave you one of them because I
definitely have like a print that you got me, fabric wrap that you got me. So I have to go look at it again. I didn't realize it was batik. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any batik stories, Sonia?
Yes. I thought I'd never done it. I think I said that in the tie-dye episode.
Mm-hmm.
But when me and our other sister were visiting you in Seattle one time,
yes,
we like went to Capitol Hill and we were just like hanging out, and there was this like little pop-up store that was like you could batik a shirt for free. So we did it, and then you like let it sit with the wax and everything. You let it sit, and then we like shopped around and we went to a bookstore, and then we saw Anthony Bourdain. He was filming something in Seattle. That was the same night.
Oh my gosh.
And then we went back to get our shirts. And then we like went back the next day and the shop was totally gone. So we didn't realize it was like a pop-up store, but
oh my
like,
gosh.
everything up that night, yeah.
It was like a magical night with batik.
Yeah.
Anthony Bourdain.
Bookstores.
It was just there for a moment.
Yeah, it was crazy.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, should we talk about the history of batik now?
Yes.
All right. Want to kick us off?
Yeah. So what is batik? It is a type of resist dyeing that uses wax. We briefly mentioned resist dyeing in our episode on tie-dye. And resist dyeing is when you apply material, such as a paste or a wax, to the fabric in a picture or a pattern and then dye the rest of the fabric. The parts that have been covered up will remain the original color of the fabric, which is usually white, while the rest is dyed. Batik has many different styles and motifs and can be used to make both pictures and patterns. One tool that is traditionally used in batik is the canting, which is essentially a wax pen. It's made of copper and bamboo. The canting can be used to make very fine lines and intricate designs. Another tool that is used is called the cap, and it is a stamp made from wood or metal. The word batik comes from the Javanese word that means painted, and Javanese is an Indonesian language. Batik refers to both the practice of doing batik and the finished object itself, similar to the word quilt. To batik, an artist applies the wax to the fabric using a canting or cap and then dyes the fabric. The process can be repeated multiple times on the same piece of fabric, so you can have a very complex, multicolored design. And batik is associated very strongly with Indonesia, but it also has traditions in Malaysia, India, Azerbaijan, China, Japan, Sri Lanka, and in countries in Africa. But today we're going to focus on the Indonesian tradition.
Yes. A lot of the batik that you see today originated in the styles created in Indonesia, specifically from the island of Java. So I thought we'd share a little bit about Indonesia. Indonesia is the fourth most populous country in the world, after India, China, and the US. The country itself is made up of many islands, between 13,000 and 25,000. And the official number is 17,508. 87% of the islands are less than 1 square kilometer, and 39% are less than 1/100th of a square kilometer. So some of them are very tiny. The islands of Indonesia fall on both sides of the equator, and the climate is really tropical. There are over 100 active volcanoes in Indonesia. One very famous one is Krakatoa or Krakatau, which erupted in 1883. And it is also known for its coral reefs. The major islands of Indonesia include Java, Sumatra, Bali, part of Borneo, and part of the island of New Guinea. And Java is home to the country's capital, Jakarta, and it is also where there are two big centers for batik, Yogyakarta and Surakarta.
So people have been living in Indonesia for over 1.7 million years. The country is a mix of cultures and peoples. There are over 300 different ethnic groups, and they speak more than 600 languages. There are also people of Chinese, Arab, Indian, Melanesian, and European descent, many of whom have lived there for generations. But overall, the Javanese are the largest ethnic group. They make up a third of the total population. One of the interesting things about Indonesia's history is that for thousands of years, small kingdoms and communities coexisted more or less peacefully. So there was no one ruler or even a dominant group that tried to take over many of all of the islands. So around the country today, there are still local courts and even rulers, but they don't have any real political power. Since 1946, Indonesia has been a democratic republic. The national language is Bahasa Indonesia, and their motto is Unity in Diversity, or Bhinneka Tunggal Ika.
Indonesia has long been a hub for trade between different cultures because of its location on the Pacific and Indian Oceans. As early as the 100 CE, there are records of Indonesian merchants trading goods overseas. Culturally, the people in Indonesia practice many religions, but Islam dominates. Islam arrived to the country in the 1300s, probably through traders from South Asia. There is also a syncretic Hindu-Buddhist religion, a mix, that is an important part of the culture. It was the court religion in many places. And here and elsewhere, when we say court, we're talking about a royal court, not a judicial court. One of the most famous Indonesian sites is Borobudur, which is an enormous Buddhist monument. And Bali is also famous for preserving its own Hindu culture and practices. Economically, Indonesia is a huge exporter of petroleum and natural gas. It's also the world's main supplier of rubber, coffee, cocoa, and palm oil. And manufacturing has become very important. Since the 1990s, it is the largest contributor to the country's economy.
So returning to batik, the earliest evidence of batik shows that this tradition is more than 2,000 years old. One of the oldest examples is a possibly batiked Egyptian gravecloth made out of linen that dates to the 300s BCE. There are examples of batik silk from China and Japan that date back to the 500s CE, and it's possible that the craft spread from China to Indonesia. The Chinese have traded with Indonesia as far back as the late 400s CE. It may have also spread from India to Indonesia. Depictions of batik are found on frescoes in the Ajanta caves in India, which date somewhere between 200 BCE and the 1st century CE. India has had a big influence on Indonesia. Indians may have brought Hinduism to Indonesia as early as the 400s and 500s. In Indonesia, on the island of Java, there are depictions of batik on the carvings at Borobudur, which is north of Yogyakarta. And Borobudur was built in the late 700s to early 800s CE.
So Java is the center of batik in Indonesia. Batik is done all over this island, in villages, factories, and in workshops near palaces and cities. There are two main methods of making batik using the tools we mentioned earlier, a canting or pen and a cap or stamp. The finest batik are made with a canting, and those are called batik tulis. Each one can take weeks to produce. Batiks made with caps are called batik cap, and it's possible to make about 20 batik cap in one day. Batik is worn in traditional clothing in Java. It can be worn as kain panjang, which is a rectangle of cloth wrapped around the hips. It can also be worn as a sarong or sarung, which is a rectangle sewn into a tube, and this is also worn around the hips. With either of these options, it is traditional for women to wear a kabaya, a blouse that is closed with a pin or brooch. Historically, men went shirtless. Women also traditionally wore a kemban, which is a wrap for the torso, kind of like a woven tube top. And batik can also be worn as a selendari, which is draped over the shoulder. And this can be a more formal outfit, and it can also be used to carry things and even children. And finally, batik was historically worn as a dodot, which is a very oversized and formal garment, and this was worn in court or in weddings. Researcher Nina Stevenson writes, cotton batik clothing is both practical and comfortable in the tropical Indonesian climate.
Within Java, there are two regional styles, batik done in the interior cities and batik done on the north coast. We'll talk about batik done in the interior first. So two major cities there have long been the centers of batik, Yogyakarta and Surakarta. Both Yogyakarta, also called Yoja, and Surakarta are historical traditional cities. They have palaces and traditional rulers who, again, do not have political power. This is similar to like the British monarchy today. In these places and other cities in the interior of Java, batik is a classical fine art associated with Hinduism and Javanese culture. It is called a halus art or traditional art, and batiks made in this tradition are called batik halus. The traditional colors used in batik halus are indigo, soga, which is a brown dye that comes from the soga tree, and white or cream, the color of the fabric. The motifs found in these batiks come from Javanese animism, a belief that every object has a spirit, and is also infused with imagery from Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Historically, there were rules about who could wear what motifs. Larangan motifs were reserved for rulers, their families, and the courts. One example of a Larangan motif is of the sawa, which is a motif based on Garuda, which is a mythical bird motif with swooping wings that is related to Vishnu in Hinduism. Batik halus were and are important in ceremonies and rituals because of the imagery that they used. Making them is also associated with the supernatural. Stevenson wrote that the women who make batik halus, quote, achieve an elevated state of mind while they are working. Making designs with a canting is slow, methodical, repetitive work that allows the artist to relax and get into a flow.
In contrast, on the North Coast, batik has long been a more commercial endeavor. There, the traditional motifs carry less weight, and the batiks tend to be more colorful floral patterns. They were produced to be traded overseas with Chinese and other Asian traders as well as Europeans. And some of the more popular motifs include depictions of lotus blossoms, frangipani, hibiscus, and lilies.
So over the past 4 centuries, European trade, especially with the Dutch, has impacted Indonesia and its batik. So this trade changed the style and practice of batik and also helped to spread batik around the world. Europeans began trading with Indonesia in the late 1500s when Portuguese traders came to the islands. The Dutch East India Company was formed in Indonesia in 1602 by the Netherlands. At first, it was a commercial endeavor. However, the company wanted not only to trade, but to control the trade within Indonesia and to have a monopoly on its resources. So this began a period of European, mainly Dutch, domination of the country that lasted until 1946 when Indonesia declared its independence.
The Dutch East India Company traded in textiles as well as spices and other goods. And they actually used Indian textiles as currency, kind of the way Chinese silks were used as currency on the Silk Road, which we mentioned in our Silk Road episode. The Dutch had a monopoly on the trade of Indian textiles called patola, which were ikat silks. We mentioned ikat before. It's when you dye the threads before you weave them. So these cloths were very desirable in Indonesia at this time, and they were worn in the courts and at weddings. And this may be how the Dutch East India Company was able to set up shop in Indonesia because of the demand for these silks. Eventually, however, the Dutch East India Company gained not only economic control, but also a lot of political power by getting involved in disputes between rulers in Indonesia. So the company would help rulers that were sympathetic to them get installed at court, and then they would demand land from them. They also installed their own Dutch governor who extracted tributes from the local population. On the other hand, the Dutch also really liked batiks. The Dutch government opened up workshops that were run by Dutch and Indonesian artists. And in the early 1800s, Indonesian textile artists invented caps to print batik more quickly. The Dutch also exported fine white cotton that artists could use to batik.
For a brief period from 1811 to 1816, the British took over Indonesia and installed their own governor, Thomas Stamford Raffles. Notwithstanding the fact that he was an imperial administrator, Raffles had a great respect for Java and its culture. He wrote a history of Java in 1817, and it depicts batik in detail. Raffles also brought batiks to England.
In 1816, control returned to the Dutch. In the mid-1800s, Dutch companies made imitation batiks using rollers to put the wax onto the fabric. So this was a way of saving time. And a company called Vlisco, which is still around today, was very successful at creating this new technology and began to print fabric in 1846. Vlisco tried to sell the fabric in Indonesia, but it was unsuccessful. The rollers that they used produced a crackling effect, which in Indonesia is a sign of lower quality batik. But if you picture batik fabric, you probably are imagining something with the crackling effect. And that's because in other places outside of Indonesia, crackle is a sign of authenticity, including in the US. However, after Vlisco failed to sell the batiks in Indonesia, the company traded them to other countries, including West Africa. And by the early 1900s, these prints became popular there and today are part of the tradition of African wax prints. And wax prints are also found in Ghana. These were batiks brought back by Ghanaian soldiers who served in the Dutch army in Indonesia. And there's much more to the story of African wax prints, but I thought that that was an interesting connection.
Yeah. The batiks came to America in the late 1800s via the World's Fairs. Again, we're mentioning World's Fairs.
More World's Fairs.
Comes up a lot, yeah. In 1883, batiks were shown at the International Colonial Exposition in Amsterdam. This inspired Dutch artists to take up batik. They were also exhibited at the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893 and at the Paris International Exposition in 1900. Batiks became popular in the US and in Europe as part of the arts and crafts movement. This movement, which was an art and interior design movement, blurred the lines between art and craft. The idea was that the things that you use and see every day should also be beautiful and well made, and there was an emphasis on nature motifs and bold colors. One artist in the US who helped spread batik's popularity was Marguerite Thompson Zorach. An artist, she traveled to Europe, as many other artists did at this time, to study, but she also traveled to Asia and Southeast Asia in 1911 to 1912 and learned to make batik. She lived in New York City and was a bohemian, and she made batik clothes. Thanks to her and others, batik enjoyed a minor craze in New York City in the 1910s. Museums in the U.S. also collected batik from the late 1800s onward, including the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. A man named Peter Meijer wrote a book in 1919 called Batiks and How to Make Them that encapsulated the popularity of batik at this time.
Batiks made, manufactured, or sold in the U.S. were different from those in Indonesia. As we mentioned before, people here liked the crackle effect. Companies also began to machine print imitation batiks, and the imitation batiks incorporated this craquille effect. Today, quilting batiks, both true batiks and imitation batiks, often include the crackle look.
In 1942, during World War II, Japan invaded Indonesia and occupied the country. The fine white cotton that artists needed to make batik was no longer available. In response, Indonesian artists on the north coast invented a new style, batik hokokai. This is a very elaborate type of design that can take up to 12 months to make. where every bit of the fabric is completely covered.
I just thought this was such a creative solution to a material shortage and a very inspiring response to a terrible time for the country. Just keep making the same piece of art longer and more elaborate. Just use what you have.
Yeah. Yeah, 12 months is like a long time to be working on that one.
Single piece of fabric. Yeah. After World War II ended in 1945, the people of Indonesia declared their independence and began calling the country by the name Indonesia. A man named Sukarno became the first president of Indonesia. The Dutch recognized their independence in 1949, and the Indonesian government established cooperatives for batik. They also encouraged the creation of a Batik Indonesia, which was a mix of North Coast colors and Central Javanese patterns. Both Sukarno and the succeeding president, Suharto, popularized batik as formal wear for men. They both wore open-collar shirts made of batik with Western-style jackets. And in 2009, the UNESCO World Heritage Organization named batik in Indonesia a masterpiece of intangible heritage of humanity. And 2009 is the same year I visited, so full circle.
Wow.
That is batik. What do you think, Sonia?
That was great. Yeah. I didn't know so much about Indonesian history. So that was great to learn more about that as like batik is threaded through it.
Yeah, I thought this one is a bit more country heavy, but there was so much I didn't know, so
Mm-hmm. And you actually got to go there, which is cool.
that was very cool. And now it makes me appreciate my batik, which I already knew is beautiful, but now it makes me appreciate it even more.
What kind of like styling is on, like motifs are on yours?
Flowers, a lot of flowers and different colors. Like the center will be one color and the edge will be another color. Yeah, lots of flowers.
Very cool.
Well, thank you so much for listening. A huge thank you to Folkwear Patterns, our sponsor. Visit folkwear.com today and sew something extraordinary.
You can email us at handmadehistoryhosts, HOSTS, @gmail.com. We'd love to hear your suggestions. We'd love to hear about the batiks you own, how many you've bought.
How many?
Yeah. What motifs? You can also check out our website, handmadehistorypodcast.com.
Bye.
Bye. Can't make it too easy on you editing later, you know.
No, we don't want that.